So this was an idea that connected to some things we were talking about on Thursday night, so I figured I'd share it when we were talking about Ir Miklat. So Rav Bazak notes the following, that definitely the halachic highlight of the parsha is Karban Pesach. The weird thing is that in the future, right, after the original, the Karban Pesach is correctly termed a Karban. But the original is a little bit less clear, right? Meaning in the future, it has every definition of a Karban. You shecht it with kavana, l'shem bailim. It even has higher standards. For those of you doing Daf Yomi, that's what we're doing right now. Higher standards. It's l'shem ochlav, l'shem bailim. There's zrik on the Mizbeach. There's all the arba avodot. All of that is true. In the original one, it's a little bit weirder. Like, you'd think it's a Karban because it's the paradigm for all future Karbanot. And in fact, the Gemara goes through in Pesachim fascinating sugyas and what's the difference between Karban, the Pesach Dorot and the Pesach Mitzrayim. And many of the features are clearly there in the original one. It has the Isser Nosar, right? You can't leave it till morning, and then you have to burn the meat, right? All that's the same. The breaking of the bone is the same. But there's one fundamental problem that forces us to ask whether the original quote-unquote Karban Pesach was in fact a Karban. And what is that? Yes, there's no Mizbeach, right? That's the glaring problem here, is there's no Mizbeach, there's no Bama, right? There's no evidence of any sort of Mizbeach, temporary, permanent, nothing. And it's not like the Torah is unaware of how to tell us that there's a Mizbeach, even a temporary one. Right? All the Avot have temporary ones. Avram, Yaakov, right? They all have Vayatzav Sham Mizbeach, they have a Matzeva, they have this, they have that, right? They're constantly building temporary Mizbeach. It's not like the Torah doesn't know how to tell us that. What exactly is going on here? So Chazal have a solution to this in Pesachim, and that is, they write, Shlosha Mizbachot Hayu, Ala Mashkov, V'al Shtei Mizuzot. The house itself was the Mizbeach, because the blood is sprinkled. There is an act of Zrika, essentially, right, of sprinkling of the blood, but it's on the house itself. Utvaltem badam asher basafi gadol mashkov Hashem mizuzot. Chazal conceptualize that pasuk as telling you that the house, or the doorway to the house itself, is the Mizbeach, right? That's how Chazal solve this problem. And Chazal really do take it as a given that the original Karban Pesach is a Karban. And to be fair, despite the lack of the Mizbeach, that's what is Ola from the Pshat of the Psukim, right? Everything seems to point in that direction, besides the lack of Mizbeach, and therefore Chazal solved it. And then, I think last year we talked about some of the Eretz Israeli traditions that go farther, right? Which claim that in the Targumei Eretz Israel, you even have traditions that God flew the Jews to Yerushalayim to shech the Karban and brought them back. Right, in 3 kitot, right, in 3 groups, because I wrote a Lumdish article about this 2 years ago, right, of how fundamental Chazal thought the notion of 3 groups was, right, that in the Mitzorah of Eretz Israel, there were 3 kitot even in Mitzrayim. In one version of the Mitzorah of Eretz Israel, Moshe would declare, okay, streets or names A to J, right, you're taught 1, right? And they did that. In a different Eretz Yisrael tradition, they actually flew to Yerushalayim and did it on Harabait in 3 groups, right? So Chazal pick up on all the cues that it's a Karban and play up on it. Okay, but here's the interesting thing: is okay, why would the Mizbeach be the house, or the house be the Mizbeach? And here's where, this is why I was thinking about it in context of what we talked about on Thursday. So Rav Bazak argues because the Mizbeach, in addition to a sacrificial place or kli, is what? Yeah, it's a place of protection. Exactly. It's a place of protection. Right? That's exactly what it is. Evidence, the Yoav story. Right? Evidence, Shmot Chaf Aleph Yadalid. If he's an intentional murderer, then you're allowed to take him from the Mizbeach, which is where Chazal derived. But if he's not, right, the Mizbeach has the power to save. It has a protective quality. Once you realize that, then the notion that Chazal say that the house itself is the Mizbeach takes on a different dimension, which is it's not just that they're solving the problem of how do they have a carbon without a Mizbeach, but they're asking a theological question, which is what mechanism, as it were, did God use to save the Jews? And the answer was, he transformed the houses into Mizbeach. Right? And then you get a different understanding of what does it mean, lo totzi min habayit min habasar chutza. Don't take the meat out of the house until morning. Of course not, because the meat stays on the Mizbeach, and then in the morning it becomes nosar, right? The house is the space in which the meat becomes nosar, where it stays, just like normally it would stay on top of the Mizbeach until the time of nosar. And you get the another dimension to what it means to the Isser of Tikol Ochel Machmetzet v'Nechrasan Eved Yisrael, that they can't have chametz in that context. Because on the one hand, you might say it's Pesach, which is true, but remember, the Mizbeach can't have chametz ever, except for the shtel, right? Except for the exceptions, right? Except for the shtel lechem, right? But otherwise, there's an Isser Kikol Seor v'Chol Dvash Lo Taktiru Minu Shel Hashem V'Al Mizbeach Lo Yalu L'Reach Mechav. You can never have it. Right, so the Isser of Chametz on the first night of Pesach, the original, isn't just about Pesach, but it's about the fact that Chametz is anathema to the Mizbeach. But, so God basically has all these halachot of the Mizbeach expressing themselves in the house in order to, as it were, theologically channel the protective capacities of the Mizbeach through the house. Right, so Rav Azak argues that it's not just that Chazal are solving the problem, where's the Mizbeach, if this is a carbon, but they're understanding that the fact that the house seems to be where there's an Isser Chametz, and there's an Isser, and no star is there, and as this protective capacity, is there what it's saying that Chazal is, so to speak, Chazal think that the Psukim are transforming the house in both its Kudshim capacities and its protective capacities into the Mizbeach to both solve the problems of where the Mizbeach for the carbon, but also to explain why it is that the blood on the door is what protects the Jewish people. Which I thought was a fascinating idea and it connected to what we were talking about. His next point here, I think we did talk about last year, so I'll take Mamash B'Kitzur Nimrat, is that you also, there, and just pay attention to this, in the Parsha, there is an ambiguity. Who's being protected? Why is there an ambiguity who's being protected? Because on the one hand, the only people in danger are the firstborns. So it should be that only the firstborns need protection. And there are psukim that imply that. Namely, God says, "V'avarti v'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla zaviketi chol b'chor b'eretz Mitzrayim v'aya adam lachem la'od al batim asher atem sham ra'iti adam v'zarti lachem v'yeh v'chem nagiv v'mashchib v'koti v'eretz Mitzrayim." God says, "I'm going to kill every b'chor. The blood will protect you," implying the b'chor. On the other hand, when Moshe says it, he says, "Utvaltem b'adam asher basav v'gatem al mashkov v'shem mezuzot min adam asher basav v'atem lo tetzu ish mitpetach veito." No human being shall leave which sounds like all the Jewish people need protection. So pay attention to that because it's a little bit weird. And Rav Bazak, B'Kitzur, suggests that two things are going on. On the one hand, God is saving the Bechors, which is what sets in motion their eventual commitment to God that needs to be redeemed by Levi. But on the other hand, it's the moment at which he actually instantiates his claim that the Jews are B'nai Bechori Yisrael. And since all Jews are also the Bechor, right, by making the Jews stay in to protect themselves, even if they're not firstborn, he's essentially giving them their status as Bechor by implying that they were in danger, right? By implying that the Jews are in danger, that gives everyone a status of a Bechor. So God is doing both. He's protecting the actual Bechors because they're Bechors, but by making the Jews stay in as if they were in danger, he is bequeathing them that status that he had started with of B'nai Bechori Yisrael, right? So that's, I think, a second element to pay attention to in the Parsha. And since it's Thursday, I threw out two ideas. You'll forgive me. Okay? We'll stop there.